Boy, accountable's a word that I can't imagine that she's familiar with. We're taking a legal deep dive now. Josh Colesrud, who is a frequent visitor to us, providing great legal insight. He's a criminal defense attorney and former federal prosecutor. Good to see you. So, in 10 words or less, just kidding. What do you make of the end of this?
Well, I'm glad that we have finality for the victims, and today was really a day for them. These victims and their families, they have been waiting for this moment for the last 5 years, and they finally had that today. And, Judge Boreski did a great job at letting these victims and the families really speak their mind in ways that sometimes judges don't allow in the courtroom. And that's because of the unique circumstances of this case. And Judge Boreski even said during his statement that Lori Vallow has caused destruction across the United States, everywhere from Louisiana to Texas to Hawaii, Idaho, and then back to Arizona. So, we finally have the moment where hopefully the victims are starting to get some closure.
But based on her statements,
right?
We brought up accountability a second ago. It has got to take everything that her victims have in their soul not to try to jump over the rail and go after her.
Not just the victims, but I would say most people in that courtroom, Mark, because, you just heard her say 7 life sentences. Is that enough? And people in the gallery, media was seated in the back. We could hear and see people react to that, kind of just disgustedly shaking their heads. One person sitting right in front of me said, no, that's not enough, So I think that just speaks to the frustration. And I can't imagine being in the shoes of some of these victims and the next of kin who have had to not only endure her during these trials here in Arizona, but her trial in Idaho too. It's been years in the making, as Josh said. And just to speak to her demeanor, and maybe an interesting point that I noticed just a few moments ago as I'm scrubbing through the video, again, our perspective in the courtroom, very different than what was seen on the streaming camera. But as we were all leaving the courtroom today, someone yelled, "Lori, rot in prison." And as she was walking out, she turned and she winked. And I think that gesture just, I don't know. I don't think there's any hope for her to ever take responsibility for anything she's done in any of these cases.
And Josh, you had said even if she does, that ruins her chances for an appeal, which is fascinating because she touted how much she's learned about the legal system throughout representing herself in these cases, just not how to not break the law, of course, and be a convicted killer. So we don't foresee her taking any responsibility, so she can appeal.
Exactly. So in almost every criminal trial, especially if you're facing a life sentence, there's going to be an appeal after the person's found guilty. Now, what does that mean? It means that if she came clean today and accepted responsibility for her actions, she would not be able to effectively argue that there was juror misconduct or the judge violated her due process rights, or there was ineffective assistance of counsel, even though she represented herself. It would then be a different type of evaluation. It would be based on a process of, was this harmless error? Because we all know that the jury made the right decision because she just admitted it. So it would really foreclose her ability to appeal.
I want to ask you, as a former prosecutor, I am sure that you faced defendants that you did not think, even though they were pleading insanity, were actually insane. They were just playing the role of someone who's insane. Without getting specifically into Lori Vallow Daybell, did you encounter that along the way?
Absolutely. And the bar for insanity is quite high. And I did have a couple of trials where it's called guilty except insane, because if you're going to plead insanity, you have to accept that you are guilty, but there's an exception that you're guilty. Now, in order to be declared insane, the best way I can describe it is if I ask you your name and you say the sky is blue. Like, you have to be really living in a different alternate universe. And Lori Vallow was declared competent not once, but twice in 2 different states. So I don't think she's going to be successful saying that she wasn't competent, even though it appears that she may make that argument later on.
Sure. Erica,
well, and I'll say in Idaho, she was deemed competent after being found incompetent. And that was an argument made here in Arizona before she ultimately went down the path of representing herself. So again, very interesting to see her in court. And one point I'll make too that we haven't touched on yet is that her sister was in the courtroom today. There were, as we were waiting to be let in, they asked, is anyone here for Lori, which is not something that has happened at all during the trials at this point in time here in Arizona. And her sister went in with 2 other women I did not recognize. It wasn't her mother, who we have seen before, but she did have someone there on her side, and her uncle spoke out after saying, you know, maybe she was there just for the sake of healing.
On a personal level, when you're a reporter covering a story that is breaking news, most of the time it can be traumatic. You suffer with it as someone who saw it firsthand for a day or so, and you can hopefully let it go. With a story like this that you've been tracking for 6 years, talking to her, talking to victims' families, what is it like for you to put a button on this?
I will say there are moments today where I teared up in the courtroom hearing some of those impact statements. I wasn't the only one. As I said, we kind of get a good look at everyone in the gallery, and there were not a lot of dry eyes when certain people were speaking. But as I look at the closing of these cases and this, you know, final court hearing for the most part, I really try to put myself in the victim's shoes. Brandon Boudreaux, the lone survivor victim. You know, we spoke to him earlier this week, and just the strength he and his family have displayed moving forward and having to face her in court. I think of Kay and Larry Woodcock, who gave really passionate impact statements today, and how they have had to continue navigating their lives and fight for justice. So yeah, it's hard as a reporter to kind of take all of that in.
Well, you're a human
but
being.
I also think it's super important that we cover these stories
Of
and we
course.
also listen to the impact that someone like Lori Vallow Daybell has on society. And as the victims have said in this case, and the next of kin, this is it for them too. They're not going to talk about her again. They're done with her. She can't contact some of them legally now. There is, you know, those orders in place. So
And
this is
interestingly,
really the end, and I think everyone's just making an effort to move on.
I was just going to say, interestingly, not only the impact on society, but on the justice system itself that she trashed in her closing statement today. The Justice Department that she just absolutely says they're responsible, not me. That, thank God, we have this justice system that allows her to go through a second series of trials on the taxpayer's dime, but to give her victims' families that sense of justice and to allow a platform to give them to get up and say, you're a piece of trash.
Yeah, not just here in Idaho too. And as for next steps, we'll just put a button on this. She will be extradited back to Idaho to serve her life sentences there. So the sentences she was issued today, really just a strong message from the court. But as you said, Mark, super important to have those convictions and these sentences now on paper for the victims in all of these cases.
All right, the I-Team's Erica Stapleton, thank you so much for your ongoing coverage, just wall to wall. And of course, Josh Colesrud, thank you so much for being here all day with your analysis. We appreciate
Terrific insight. And thanks for your great reporting on this, Erica. It's been phenomenal. Lori Vallow Daybell, now convicted and sentenced to life in prison in 2 states. Her story from doomsday mom to double murder conspirator has garnered national attention. But our coverage doesn't stop here. Head to 12 Plus to watch full digital or special breaking down the entire case, the trials, and what could come next.
In other news,